Back in October, at what is one of my favorite moments so far here at Temple Israel, where I played Rabbi Oprah, I was teaching a lesson about hope that I saw in the story of Noah. I stood on the bema in the sanctuary and I asked, what are the things that give you hope in humanity? After an awkward pause, a few of you chimed in with some wonderful examples, which I hope many of you can still think of today, either a baby or someone was telling me that someone paid for their coffee at Starbucks. The pay it forward kind of thing might give you some hope in humanity. But then I followed that question with, what are the things about humanity that break your heart? And unfortunately, it seems as though that question was easier to answer. And now, as I sat down to write my sermon this week, I found myself feeling the same thing. So many things are breaking my heart about humanity right now. I find myself drowning in the hopelessness between the growing number of mass shootings to the hate-mongering pouring all over my social media about Muslims and the refusal of our nation and other nations to live by the Judeo-Christian values of welcoming the stranger. I thought back to Noah and how God had completely given up hope on humanity, was going to destroy all of creation because humans had ruined it for everybody. But then God found Noah. And even though his heart had been broken, he chose hope. God chose hope. Because Noah was a righteous man in his time. And after the last few weeks we've had, I've been thinking and wondering if God made the right decision there. Are there righteous individuals still among us? I think the answer is yes. I hope the answer is yes. So this week's Torah portion, we find the beginning of the story of Joseph. And Joseph is often looked at as a spoiled brat, but let's rewind a little bit before Joseph and talk about his dad, Jacob. The first words of this week's portion are, Vayeshev Yaakov be'eretz megurei aviv be'eretz Canaan. Jacob now settled in the land of his father's sojourning, in the land of Canaan. Jacob, it says, Vayeshev, settled. And while this text is referring to a particular physical location, our sages teach that this settling was an effort for Jacob to disengage from the problems of living. Jacob was not simply trying to find a place of permanence. Rather, he was looking to escape all of the turbulence he had experienced up until then. Jacob had many ups and downs in his life. For instance, you may recall when he was a boy, he and his mother conspired to steal the blessing for the eldest son from his brother, which then caused his brother to want to kill him, which then meant Jacob had to leave home, abandon his family in order to survive. Then he went to his uncle's house where he fell in love with Rachel, was told he would work 7 years to marry Rachel, and then lo and behold, he was tricked and he married Leah, so he worked another 7 years to get Rachel, and then she was infertile. And when Rachel finally did have children, she died during the birth of her second child. Jacob had a lot of downs. So I can kind of understand this desire to want to settle somewhere and protect yourself from what is going on in the outside world. But Jacob didn't learn lessons from his own past, because as his mother had picked a favorite child, Jacob also chose a favorite child, Joseph. And Jacob didn't think about what the consequences of that action would be, even though he knew his mother's actions had huge consequences for him. Jacob attempting to settle as a means of silencing the world around him, I believe, was him giving up on humanity, not a righteous move. And when we think about the consequences of Jacob's actions, what we read about in this week's Torah portion, the big consequence is Joseph's brothers sell him into slavery. It is Joseph this time, not God, that I begin to wonder, why wouldn't he give up on humanity? He had some dreams. His brothers interpreted them. They took offense. They sold him into slavery. He was separated from everyone he knew and loved, separated from the land in which he was raised. But he doesn't give up on humanity. Despite having every reason in the world to do so, again, he was sold into slavery, abandoned by his family, bought by an Egyptian, Potiphar, and then Potiphar's wife took an interest in Joseph, and he ended up being thrown in jail because Potiphar's wife, when Joseph would not accept her advances, accused him of making advances on her, even though that wasn't the case. But I noticed something this time in the Joseph narrative that I'd never noticed before. Again, and it's not Joseph who's interpreting his dreams. It says very clearly in the Torah, Joseph goes up to his brothers. He's 17 years old. He's like, hey guys, I had an amazing dream. Let me tell you about it. It was wild. And all of them have something with all these sheaves of corn or ears of corn bowing down to Joseph, or the stars bowing down to one star. And the brothers interpret this as all of them bowing down to Joseph. But Joseph does not actually say this, which I just thought was very interesting, because they're interpreting the dream for him and reacting to their interpretation of his dream and not actually engaging in a conversation about it. Despite Joseph's brothers' active determination to decide Joseph's fate for him, it's how Joseph responds and how he creates his own narrative is what in the end defines him. The Joseph narrative teaches that despite all the reasons we may have for giving up on humanity, I feel like this week I don't need to name them. We don't allow those things to cause us to lose hope. We do not allow those things to write our story or to define us. Rabbi Brad Artson argues that Joseph's time in prison, which again was a major down, serves as a personal turning point for him, from spoiled sibling to righteous man. Rabbi Artson says, it is only in prison that Joseph is able to overcome his arrogance and learn how to sympathize. He learns that even prisoners are human beings and that one can excel without having to belittle the talents or interest of other people. Only in prison does Joseph learn to accept the fundamental principle of Jewish living, Kol Yisrael Aravim Zeh Bazeh. We are all responsible for one another. He learns through suffering that his own talent can thrive only when it is accompanied by caring for another's well-being. We are all responsible for one another. Just as God did not give up on humanity in the time of Noah, humanity mustn't give up on itself today, or at least I mustn't. We must seek out the righteous like in the time of Noah, or do our best to be them. So what makes a person righteous? Dr. Aviva Zornberg, a modern Bible scholar, teaches us that the full tension of composure and discomposure, of order and disorder in the world is felt most acutely by the righteous, by those whose sense of beauty and desire for order exposes them to the shock of reality. We do not settle. We do not try to numb ourselves to the outside world, as Jacob tried to do when he settled in Canaan. Instead, we do what we can with what we've got, like Joseph did. Noah didn't settle to be like others of his time. He stood out. Joseph didn't allow his life circumstances to deter him from impacting others. And really, this message from Joseph of not settling for things as they are is inherent in Hanukkah, as Rabbi Greenstein spoke about. You may know the famous debate between Hillel and Shammai about how to light the Chanukiah, the Hanukkah menorah. Shammai, who knows what Shammai said, how you should light it? How many candles? Well, not direction, but how many candles and things. 8 the first night, 7 the second night, 6 the next night, to symbolize what actually happened in the temple, right? The first day, they had the most oil. The second day, they had a little bit less and a little bit less. And Hillel said, absolutely not. We never diminish the holy. We only increase. But as I was reading this week, I found that there was another option that the sages spoke about, and that was that there were 2 other options. One was that you the head of the household lights a candle, one candle, every night for the household. That's one. Hillel one, obviously. The second one is that every single person in the house lights a candle for themselves. And while I am glad we do it the way we do, I can't help but think what it would mean for our light to come together. For those of us who want to see more light in the world, to all be responsible for each other and for bringing light. So as we look at our light and we think about what it means to be righteous, to not settle for things as they are, and we think about how we will hold on to hope in darkness, and remember that our way to do that is by bringing our own light and by caring for the well-being of every human. Shabbat shalom.